Shabbat Shalom, and Mazel Tov to our graduating seniors on Kol Ami graduation this Shabbat, and on your graduations from high school. Parashat Korach presents a story that could not be more timely. As the children of Israel wander in the wilderness toward the promised land, the Torah introduces us to a figure named Korach, and here is what happens. And Korach, son of Yitzhar, son of Kehat, son of Levi, took up, and with him Datan and Aviram, sons of Eliav, and On, son of Pelet, sons of Ruvain. And they rose before Moses, and men from the children of Israel with them, 50 and 200, chieftains of the community, those called for convening, men of renown. And they assembled against Moshe and against Aaron. Why are Korach and his allies and supporters doing this? What do they want? The Torah gives us a clue by showing us who they are and what exactly they are doing. These are people who already have great prestige. Korach descends from Levi and thus is in the prominent priestly echelon of Israelite society. His three main allies descend from Ruvain, the firstborn son of Yaakov, Jacob. Convention would entitle them to the top political echelon. But the Israelites did not set up their society that way. Instead, they followed Moshe, not because of pedigree, but because he led them in God's path toward liberation and justice, and they trusted his leadership on the merits. The Torah describes the other supporters with three titles: chieftains of the community, they are powerful; those called for convening, they are influential; and men of renown, they are famous. What all these people have in common is that they already have some power, or think they should. What they want, the Torah is suggesting, is not just some power, but all of it. Not just influential positions, but the very top ones. We see this raw self-interest unfurl in what Korach and his people do. And they arose before Moshe, vayakumu lifnei Moshe. This verb is the same one from, for example, the verse, and Cain arose, vayakam, toward Abel his brother and killed him. No ordinary discussion of differences. 50 and 200 people. Try to imagine a debate stage where one candidate brings 250 people with him. Again, not something you do if you are coming in respect and peace. Finally, and they assembled against Moshe and against Aaron. The situation is escalating. Before, Korach and his people arose before Moshe, lifnei Moshe. Now they assemble against, or literally upon, Moshe and Aharon. Korach and his allies are trying to make Moshe and Aharon an offer they can't refuse. They are coming to topple the people's legitimate leaders, and they are ready to physically fight them. Then Korach and his allies say to Moshe and Aharon, "You have too much. For the whole entire community is holy, and among them is Adonai. And for what reason do you raise yourselves up over the assembly of Adonai?" In their rhetoric, Korach and his allies are, in today's parlance, populist. This is why the Torah shows us their true motivations first, so that when we hear their rhetoric, we can see through it as a front, as self-serving. And even their rhetoric shows telltale signs of their real purposes. When Korach and his allies use not one but two adjectives for the people, the whole entire community, they are exaggerating the point because they do not actually mean it. When they describe Moshe and Aharon as raising themselves up over people, Korach and his allies are projecting. That is precisely what they are doing. and when they assert that somehow Moshe and Aharon are against God himself, they let slip their real aim of simply attacking Moshe and Aharon. In truth, Moshe is the one to whom justice and human dignity are genuinely important. We saw this earlier when his father-in-law Yitro proposed that Moshe create lower court judges and delegate power to them, and Moshe readily agreed. We saw this again 2 weeks ago when two men started prophesying without authorization, and Moshe, instead of feeling challenged by it, said, "If only all Adonai's people were prophets." And we see Moshe's devotion to God's vision of human dignity in the mitzvot that Moshe hands down. Love your fellow as yourself. Do not oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Justice, justice shall you pursue. By contrast, Korach and his allies want power not for justice's sake, but for their own sake. They will use whatever arguments will get them power most expediently, and they have already convinced hundreds to join them. The fate of Korach and his allies is as gripping as any blockbuster movie. And the ground that was under them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them, and they went down alive to the netherworld. This scene is best understood as a literary image symbolizing the punishment that fits the crime of Korach and his allies. By seeking power for their own raw self-interest, by exploiting language to deceive people and incite them, by threatening violence, and by dividing the people, Korach and his allies sundered the ground that underlies all of society. And that same hole in society's foundations is what swallows up Korach and his allies. The Korach story is an ethical and spiritual training session for us all in seeing through language that conceals its self-serving purposes, in eschewing and stopping these stratagems, and in knowing what the consequences can be when we do not. And this story is especially apt for the Shabbat of our high school graduation, because this training is key to coming of age. Seniors, you will soon cast, or recently cast, your first votes for leaders at the highest level. On a personal level, you will meet all kinds of people in college. In each case, ask yourself, does this person sound more like Moshe or more like Korach? Do they genuinely care about my and others' well-being? Do they act on that care, even if they are imperfect, as we all are? Or are they concealing that they're only looking out for themselves? Is this someone who's willing to harm others to get what they want? Can I trust this person? The Torah gives us the compass we need to deal with this question. The Torah also gives us a cause for optimism in the fact that the story centers around not only Korach, but also Moshe. We each have the capability not only to reject Korach's paradigm, but to embrace Moshe's legacy. And indeed, after the Korach story, the people continue to follow Moshe and Aharon through the wilderness. That is precisely how they get to the promised land. May we too follow the calls that Moshe heard from God's voice, and together get closer to a promised land now. Shabbat Shalom.